It's time for video 4 of my Bond series, and I've reached the films made in my lifetime, and I'm finally finished with Roger Moore. So the next film up was The Living Daylights, when finally we have Timothy Dalton playing Bond. They had needed to make a change after A View to a Kill, which was just rubbish and was playing on some awful elements that had emerged throughout Roger Moore's tenure. So they changed that, got rid of Roger Moore, and brought in Timothy Dalton, who had been considered before, but they've kept the director John Glenn. He'd done the previous 3, and they've given him a budget of $40 million and said, reinvent Bond. And the way they do that is to play even more with this very 80s mentality that they're going for. And a lot of this works. They've got rid of a lot of the bad things about Roger Moore and replaced it with emotion from Bond, or rather reaction, consequence. When he gets thrown into a wall, his hair is messed up. When he wakes up after being drugged, his hair is messed up. These things actually have an effect. And he reacts with anger to things. He reacts with emotions that you would see from someone who doesn't want to do the things that he's doing, but feels he must for the good of the country. Although there is that element of personal vendetta involved, that he is going against orders. He doesn't shoot Kara at the beginning because he has a feeling. Turns out to be right, fine, but it's setting up this Bond as individual more so than Roger Moore had, who had always had a close relationship with M and the service. Overall, the film is okay, but it really suffers from a contemporary viewing. It's a proper spy movie. He does some spying. He lies as a spy. It doesn't rely on the Soviet fear as much. The main villain is actually American, and it's about anti-war, anti-gun running, things like that. But the trouble is that it then glorifies the Mujahideen. It goes to Afghanistan, and these rebels who would become major global terrorists. At that time, they were being funded by the CIA as a proxy war with the Soviets. So it's just a confusing view of politics in this film. It's trying to go for this individual fighting against these big, horrible forces, but it's actually backing CIA-backed terrorism. It really only emerges in the final third, but it really takes the viewing experience in a different direction. And so what they've done to Bond and brought him into a much more realistic and enjoyable field. Unfortunately, the consequences of this particular story detract a lot from the enjoyment. Next up was License to Kill, and this was 1989. So you've gone from Roger Moore, 85, 87, you've got Timothy Dalton, 89, the second Timothy Dalton, again directed by John Glenn. This time budget $32 million, and it's still making $150 million. A View to a Kill had made $160. Reinventing Bond in The Living Daylights made $190 million. This one back down to $156. But 1989 was a very good year for films, so it's still a decent amount when you're going up against a bunch of other films. This one had issues with the writer's strike, and so what they've done is, instead of formulating a well-written plot, is they've gone for a remake of old Bond stories and added violence and gore. It's really violent. It's the first Bond movie to get a 15 certificate in the UK, and it's graphic at moments in its violence. There had been moments earlier in the Bond series where you think that's on the edge of graphic violence, and here it basically remakes those images much, much worse. I'm thinking of Benicio del Toro's death, similar to a scene in A View to a Kill, but much, much more graphic now. Bond himself sticks with this more angry, more emotionally affected character. He's not so obsessed with sex. He's not so obsessed with hiding his emotions, which I think had been an effective thing throughout Bond, especially in the Connery years. He's using this nothing affects me facade to hide his true emotions. That works a little bit in License to Kill because they open with a wedding. It's Felix's wedding, and it plays out similar to Bond's own wedding. They make reference to Bond's earlier marriage, and he doesn't want to talk about it, obviously. So there's good elements here building up to what could be an interesting take on Bond's reaction to things. Unfortunately, they turn it into a bullshit revenge plot. I like the South American drug lord villain. Robert Davi does really well. You forget after a moment that he's one of the Fratellis from the Goonies. He plays it well. He brings a lot to this kind of two-dimensional character. One of the best lines from him is about loyalty being more important than money. That had been improvised by Davi to bring more to the character. So he did really well. And you add a Bond girl who is basically a girl Bond. She's fucking badass. She's got a bigger gun than him. She would do all of these amazing things on her own. So they work together. It's better than most of the Bond girls, and Carrie Lowell does quite well. Her Pam Bouvier is interesting, but it's just making a girl version of Bond. She's not really much of her own character. And again, the politics of this one is confusing because it's clearly using Robert Davi and his acne scars to come across as Manuel Noriega, the Panama dictator who had been put in place by the CIA, who then the CIA wanted to get rid of. It's this confusing look because the movies don't use much of the USA. It's Bond on a solo mission, hints at American necessity in the plot. But the fact that they're playing with these ideas that are actually very much linked to American foreign policy and CIA action and not delve into those, it's weak. It's glossing over a lot of what could be explored here in a proper story. It's not a proper story. It's, we've got Bond, we've given him some emotions, we add a sad beginning, and then blow everything up, murder people horribly. It's way too long, and what they've done is add a bunch of gore to make it so. After that, we finally have a break. For only the second time since the beginning of the Bond movies, we have more than a 2-year gap. It's a 6-year gap between 89 and 95 through legal issues, Albert Broccoli's declining health, and huge changes in the structure of global politics, meaning a new Bond film would have to reflect that. So they took their time to write something good. And they did. GoldenEye is good. Even looking back and thinking that some of it might be a bit questionable, I still really enjoyed it. I've been watching so many Bond movies that to finally have one that I genuinely enjoyed was such a relief. And it's partly because this was the first Bond movie I saw, and it reminds me of watching it over and over as a kid. Partly it's Sean Bean's villain, who is great, because Sean Bean is great and he plays the bad Bond really well. Partly it's Pierce Brosnan, who I have this nostalgia for as Bond, and who plays it in a not quite Connery, but definitely not Roger Moore sort of way. He has those moments of emotion that Dalton had, but not nearly as strong. He has those moments of quip like Roger Moore, but not as much. He's much closer to Connery in those ways, but also adds a contemporary feel to it that Connery definitely did not. The story is fine. It plays with those Russian post-Soviet elements quite well. It makes a relatively believable villain from Russia, General Urumov, who's a little bit cartoonish, but the justification for it is okay. It's not pushing this anti-Russian idea because the Russian defense minister is basically a good guy. They have Bond's connection to the villains as a good guy Russian played by Robbie Coltrane. Overall, the plot makes some sense. It throws in new technologies that are necessary after huge changes between 89 and 95. But the key to this movie that makes it work is M. It's Judi Dench. They play on the fact that it's a woman, but they've got a high-quality actor to deliver these lines that put Bond in his place.
Because I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War, whose boyish charms, though wasted on me, obviously appeal to that young woman I sent out to evaluate you.
It brings back to this, which was very important in the books, this relationship between Bond and M. The justification for Bond's involvement comes from M. It is her job to send Bond out into the field, and here it feels worthy. She calls him out on his bullshit, she calls him a dinosaur, a relic, and she is the more modern view of MI6, and that works. It takes away elements of Bond that don't work. He also doesn't smoke, he barely drinks, he doesn't fuck around nearly as much, but it's M putting him in his place culturally and in terms of behaviour that makes this one work so well. Only issue is that he can run faster than bullets, and the action is a little bit over the top. I mean, especially the death of Alec Trevelyan, one of Sean Bean's most elaborate. But overall, the movie is good to watch. It has an interesting Bond girl who, again, calls him out on his bullshit and has her own abilities. It works, and they had made the effort to make it work. Now, GoldenEye, directed by Martin Campbell, had made $352 million from a budget of $60. So this was a huge success, biggest box office by miles for a Bond film. So there was clearly demand for another, and so they rushed. Within 2 years, Tomorrow Never Dies, 1997. They got Roger Spottiswoode to direct because Campbell didn't want to do two in a row. They gave him $110 million, and they made 333. So they did well. They got world-famous Sheryl Crow to sing the song. They really went for it. Some of the special effects are great. Some of the action set pieces are fantastic. The motorbike scene is incredible. But with this one, it needed a rewrite. You can just tell from the way that it goes that it needed a rewrite. Jonathan Pryce does well as Carver, but there's just too many scenes of him. It's exposition, but it's also just talking. They're trying to establish his character through him saying things, and it's not working because his character is kind of confused. He's megalomaniac, he's insane, he's also computer savvy. Watching it now, it's like watching Steve Jobs and a cheap version of the Joker. There's just confusion there. It's real plan, also anarchy. It's not particularly well constructed, and this goes for the entire movie. There's whole scenes where you think, okay, I get what they're trying to do here, but it needed rewriting. There's a scene where Carver's giving exposition, and they have him speaking on TV in the background while Bond gets beaten up. Okay, combine those two things to make it interesting, but it's still boring. It still feels long and boring. They could have reduced all of that to a much more concise scene, improving the pace of the movie. The whole plot hinges on this potential war between Britain and China, and Hong Kong is not mentioned. Hong Kong was returned to China at the end of 1997 after 100 years of British rule, and it's not mentioned. That should be a key to the conflict here. It was in a original spec script, and then they ditched that because they couldn't put that out at the end of 97 for various reasons, probably fear of what that might do, confusion over it, I don't know. But they chose not to, and then they don't mention it. They get Michelle Yeoh to come in and play the Chinese agent, who is fantastic. She's so good. You can't tell Michelle Yeoh to be a manipulated Bond girl. She does her own thing and it's great. But again, she's just playing a girl Bond. It's a Chinese girl Bond, not particularly adding anything to it. GoldenEye had, with her being a computer hacker, knowing things that Bond didn't. But Michelle Yeoh's character is basically just Chinese girl Bond. Terry Hatcher came in from the success of playing Lois Lane, and she does okay with her role, but it's a reduced role, giving Bond revenge. And that's been a key throughout all of these. The Living Daylights, Bond adds a revenge element. License to Kill, Bond quits so he can go on a revenge mission. GoldenEye, it's about revenge. Alec Trevelyan getting revenge for his ancestors, Bond getting revenge against Alec for betraying him, and here it's Bond getting revenge against Carver for killing his own wife, who Bond had had a relationship in the past. It adds this one-man Rambo element that really detracts from it. The great thing about GoldenEye was the connection with M. Here, M is on a separate mission confronting her as time goes by co-star Jeffrey Palmer playing an admiral there at loggerheads, and that's fun to watch, but Bond isn't there for that. Bond is off having these amazing adventures with a remote control car, which I loved as a kid. It's pretty good, and there's a moment at the end of that where I noticed he's enjoying this destruction. He's enjoying killing people, and it really takes away from Bond here. M is supposed to put him in his place, and she's off having her own fight. And again, here there's women using sex for villainy, which had started in the early 80s in the late Roger Moore movies, and now it seems like every movie, a female villain is using sex to get what they want. They'd had in GoldenEye Famke Janssen's on a top, using sex and becoming this nymphomaniac, so female sexuality is still being highly criticised in these movies and really portrayed negatively. And again, it feels like Paris Carver, Terry Hatcher's character, is using sex to get what she wants, and it's completely forgiving of all the sex that Bond wants to have, even if it's distracting him. So all the hard work they'd done for GoldenEye to improve the Bond character is lost here because they've rushed the script. Then, in 1999, the last Bond movie of the millennium, The World Is Not Enough. And it's crap. It's taken away all of the hard work done by GoldenEye. They took time to write that one. They've rushed out 2 more in 2-year gaps, and it shows it's rubbish. Michael Apted does his best. Like, visually, it's quite good. 135 million budget, shows on the screen, it looks good. It still made 361 million at the box office, so it was a success, but it is crap. They take a good idea for a plot, an oil pipeline, they have a good idea of a female villain, they add interest to her character, there is depth to her character, they add Robert Carlyle's Renard as an absurdity, but that leads to one good moment between him and M that almost justifies his absurd character, but the writing of this movie is bad. It has its lame jokes at dead people and unjustified sex scenes. Some of the action is nonsense. They've just gone, this will look cool, but they haven't thought about it really. And the real victim of this poor writing is actually Denise Richards' Dr. Christmas Jones, who is just a barely one-dimensional character. She just tells you what the threat is in that moment. She is basically a ticking clock. We need to do this. I need to do this. I can't do this. She is explaining the purpose of the plot without any indication of urgency or stakes. She's just, this is what we need to do. And it's so weak. And this runs throughout the film. They're really trying to push this relationship between Bond and Sophia Masso's Electra King, but that feels forced. She should not be doing some of the things she does with Bond. I guess that's unfair. She's fine. It's Bond's reaction to those things that are not good. And again, the best thing about GoldenEye was Bond and M's relationship, and here it's reduced to Bond save me, doesn't even say anything, just shoots her to set her free. She watches him do his thing. She is the emotion Bond is supposed to be feeling. All he feels is a bit of anger, rage even, happily going to murder an unarmed person, as if that justifies all the other murder he's been doing. It's just a confusing plot with no sense of real stakes. Yes, there is a bomb, but Bond will stop it, and it's frustrating to watch. So you've got 5 movies here spanning 13 years, and it's such a shift. But ironically, it goes from The Living Daylights, which has this angry Bond, no longer Roger Moore, then it goes up to the peak of GoldenEye, and then it descends back to The World Is Not Enough, which is basically the same as The Living Daylights. Bond is angry, the plot is copying old Bond, not really caring, trying to do interesting things with female characters, adding some absurdity, and lacking a proper story that you want to tell, lacking an element of Bond in that story. What is the purpose of Bond being there? It's either convoluted in these movies, or it's unjustified, which you can get away with sometimes. GoldenEye's villain is convoluted. A former Lian's Cossack getting into MI6, okay. You can justify that by writing it well. They can't justify some of the things in the other movies. There are moments in these movies that show what they're trying to do with Bond, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. In The Living Daylights, there's disgust when he uses a naked woman to distract someone so he can kill them. And you compare that to anger and disgust in The World Is Not Enough. Bond is angry and disgusted, so he wants to murder people. It's not at his own behaviour, it's at other people. It's outward disgust, and that's just making him self-righteous killer. And oh my god, there's a lot of killing. In The World Is Not Enough, he kills someone and smiles. In Tomorrow Never Dies, he causes destruction and smiles. And there's no real tension in these movies. In The World Is Not Enough, there's a moment where they find out the threat, they find out the stakes, they find out that this is immediate. So they go, oh no, we have 72 minutes to stop this bomb. And he turns to Colin Salmon's MI6 agent and says, can you get me there? And he says, yeah, of course.
Charles, can you get me out there? Of course.
Of course. There's no threat there, because of course they can get Bond there in time. It's even in the script how little tension there is when Bond is involved. What you need to do is try and create that tension, despite the audience knowing that Bond will save the day, and they utterly fail here. There are moments in GoldenEye where they get away with that because there's a conflict with Bond. Can he kill Alec? Should he kill Alec? Should the girl be there when he kills Alec? These are just some of the ways in which they try to create that tension, especially with a character who is Bond's equal. Here, it's a psychopath and a woman, neither of which you ever feel is a threat to Bond. And that's proven in the way that Bond kills them. Bond kills them ruthlessly. They always take him somewhere and try to kill him in a certain way, and he just kills them. The moment when he kills Elektra it feels very non-Bond, because he just shoots her and then is angry over her corpse. And M sees this, and M is the emotion you're supposed to be feeling. But I felt angry at Bond. And again, and in the scripts, there's just no subtext to any of the conversations going on, whereas that worked in GoldenEye because it was about conflict. Here, it's just exposition, and it takes away a lot of the subtlety of the films. And they've even reverted to some of the worst tendencies of Bond. In The World Is Not Enough, he is on a boat, and he dives underwater, and that's where he fixes his tie. There had been that callback to Thunderball, where he's just climbed up a building and fixes his cuff. In GoldenEye, he fixes his cuff. In Tomorrow Never Dies, he straightens his jacket and making fun of themselves. So although there are elements of these movies that they're really bringing in that work, a sense of emotion, okay, great. Judi Dench is fantastic. Some of the technology works well. Some of the plot devices they use, like especially with Russia, work well. Tomorrow Never Dies, the music is fantastic because they've gone old school with new elements that really, really works, keeping that John Barry theme, but modernizing it. Some of it works, but they just rushed, and it really shows as the three Brosnan films really, really decline. So, my top 3 Bond films after 20, including the non-Eon Never Say Never Again, is difficult because there are 4 I want to choose. It's been very easy up to now because it's just been the first 3, but now I want to add GoldenEye to that list. So which one do I take out? Probably Goldfinger, which I know is a controversial choice because Goldfinger is the best villain and has some of the best elements, but the violence and inappropriateness with Pussy Galore, watching again this time, really took away from enjoying the film. So my top 3 at the moment is Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and GoldenEye. None of these have come close to being the worst one. I enjoy the Dalton ones as individual things, not particularly during a whole run of Bond films where the negatives really jump out. But when I first saw License to Kill, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed Tomorrow Never Dies. I didn't enjoy World Is Not Enough, but it's not nearly as bad as some of Roger Moore's, so the worst one is still A View to a Kill. Next, I have one more Brosnan film that I am not looking forward to. It is actually the last Bond movie that I have never seen before. And then I will get into the 4 Daniel Craig movies, and that will be my final video in this series. So, if you want to see that, please subscribe. Please like this video if you have, maybe even if you haven't, just to help me. And I will see you next time.